He thought he could humiliate a royal guard and walk away. But in just seconds, he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The streets of London were alive with the usual buzz of tourists, their cameras clicking as they marveled at the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. The crisp morning air carried the scent of fresh rain, and the golden sun cast long shadows on the cobblestone roads. Among the many sights that drew admiration, none commanded more attention than the royal guards. Their red tunics and tall black bearskin hats stood in stark contrast against the pale stone of the palace, a living emblem of discipline, tradition, and unwavering duty. Among them stood Corporal Elijah Carter, a man whose presence alone exuded silent strength. His deep brown skin gleamed in the sunlight, a striking contrast to the crisp white gloves that gripped his ceremonial rifle. His face was unreadable, his posture rigid, an immovable force amidst the ever-moving tide of onlookers. He had served as a royal guard for 6 years, enduring the taunts, the mockery, the absurd antics of tourists who often mistook his silence for submission. But nothing had ever broken his composure. He was a fortress of discipline, trained to ignore everything and maintain his stance, no matter the circumstances. A few feet away, a tour guide animatedly recited facts about the guards to a group of eager tourists. They are trained to never react, no matter what. You can make faces at them, shout at them, even try to get them to flinch, and they won't move an inch, she explained, her voice filled with admiration. It's part of their duty, total self-control. In the crowd, a few visitors tested that claim, making exaggerated gestures, snapping selfies inches from the guards' faces. Some laughed when their efforts were met with complete indifference. Among them, however, one man wasn't laughing. He was watching. He was tall, wearing a faded leather jacket and a sneer that curved his lips. His name was Martin Hayes, a man who carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences. His eyes locked onto Elijah Carter, and something in his expression darkened. To him, Carter didn't belong. A black man in the uniform of the Queen's finest. A contradiction, an insult. He leaned towards his friend, chuckling under his breath. Bet he thinks he's something special, standing there like that. What a joke. The friend shifted uncomfortably. Maybe just let it go, man. But Hayes wasn't the type to let things go. A waiter from a nearby cafe, balancing a tray of steaming tea, happened to glance up just in time to see Hayes stepping forward. His brows furrowed. There was something about the man's posture, the way he moved with deliberate intent, that sent an uneasy feeling crawling down the waiter's spine. He opened his mouth to say something, but the moment slipped past too quickly. Elijah remained still, unbothered, his gaze locked forward as Hayes edged closer. The air shifted. The casual, light-hearted energy of the street changed, though most people hadn't noticed it yet. But something was coming. Something that would shatter the moment of peace. The sound of tourist chatter filled the air, cameras clicking, footsteps shuffling. It was an ordinary morning in London, yet within seconds, the energy of the street would shift into something else entirely, something unforgettable. Martin Hayes took another step forward, his eyes locked onto Corporal Elijah Carter, like a predator eyeing its prey. He smirked, shoving his hands into his pockets, exuding the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Look at him, he muttered to his friend, standing there like he's some kind of king. Bet he thinks he's better than us. His friend hesitated, sensing where this was going. Just leave it, mate. It's not worth it. But Hayes wasn't listening. He was already too deep in his own delusion of power. Elijah remained still, his jaw set, his eyes fixed forward. He had faced countless provocations in his years of service. Tourists yelling in his face, people trying to make him laugh, even the occasional drunkard testing their luck. But he had never broken formation, never given them the satisfaction of a reaction. Hayes, however, wanted more than just amusement. He wanted humiliation. He stepped so close that his breath could be felt against Elijah's cheek. The guard didn't flinch. "What's wrong, huh? You deaf? Or maybe you just know your place?" Hayes sneered, his voice just loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. A few people turned their heads, sensing the shift in mood. Still, Elijah didn't move. The silence only fueled Hayes's anger. His smirk twisted into a scowl. He wanted to see this man break, wanted to see him react, wanted to strip him of the dignity his uniform represented. And then, in one disgusting, calculated motion, he spit. The glob of saliva landed right on Elijah's cheek, glistening under the morning sun. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The chatter, the laughter, the clicking cameras, all of it stopped. Time froze. Elijah's grip on his rifle tightened ever so slightly. It was a barely perceptible movement, but those who were watching closely, those who understood what had just happened, felt the tension coil like a spring ready to snap. The tourists looked around, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some held their breath, waiting for a reaction. Others shifted awkwardly, pretending not to see, unwilling to involve themselves. But not everyone stayed silent. A middle-aged woman, clutching a shopping bag, gasped in disbelief. "Oh my God, did he just—" A man with a camera, already filming, murmured, "He's not going to get away with that, is he?" Even Hayes's own friend took a step back, his face pale. "Jesus, Martin, what the hell's wrong with you?" But Hayes didn't care. He chuckled, shaking his head. "What's the matter? Can't do anything, can you? You're just a glorified statue." The words dripped with venom, meant to sting. He expected Elijah to crumble, to falter, to react in some way, any way. But the royal guard remained still, silent, unshaken, and that silence was deafening. Then, from the crowd, a voice cut through the tense air. That was a mistake. It came from an older man standing near a cafe, arms crossed. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight, authority, like he knew something the others didn't. Hayes scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh yeah? And what's going to happen, old man? He's not allowed to touch me. I know the rules." But the older man didn't respond. He just smiled, a knowing smile. And suddenly the weight of the moment shifted. The air, thick with silence, grew heavier. It was as if the entire street, the entire world, was holding its breath. Hayes, still grinning, turned back to Elijah, and that's when he saw it. For the first time, the guard moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A small tilt of the head, a shift of the jaw, a slow, deliberate inhale. And in that moment, Hayes's smirk faded. Because something about that movement, that quiet, controlled response, it wasn't submission. It was a warning. A warning that Martin Hayes had just crossed a line he should never have crossed. The street had never been this silent before. The chatter, the footsteps, the clicking of cameras, all of it had melted away. What remained was a tension so thick, so suffocating, that even those who had only caught glimpses of the scene could feel something monumental was about to unfold. Elijah Carter, still as stone, stood with his rifle in hand, his grip firm but measured. The warm spit dripped down his cheek, but he didn't flinch. He didn't move to wipe it away. And yet, something had changed. Martin Hayes felt it first, that eerie sensation that he had pushed too far, that somehow the situation was no longer under his control. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice came out weaker than before. See? Nothing. Just a... Then Elijah took a step forward, one single step, and the entire street held its breath. Hayes's confidence wavered. His smirk faltered. He had taunted the guard, spit in his face, and still, he had expected nothing in return. But now, the Royal Guard was moving, and suddenly, the weight of that uniform, the authority it carried, became very real. Hey man, Hayes's friend mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. Maybe we should... But it was already too late. Elijah's voice, deep and unwavering, cut through the silence. You have violated the dignity of the Royal Guard. The words sent a shiver through the air. There was no anger in them, no shouting, no aggression, just a statement, a fact. The weight of centuries of discipline, of history, of a code that could not be broken, rested behind those words. And then, the sound of marching boots. From the far end of the street, they came. 2 more Royal Guards appeared first, stepping into position with precise, calculated movements. Then, a 3rd man, a superior officer in a dark blue uniform, adorned with medals, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. The crowd instinctively parted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Oh God, he's in trouble now. They never break formation. Why are they moving? Did he just break a law? Hayes, for the first time, looked nervous. He glanced around, searching for an escape, but the weight of 100 eyes pinned him in place. The moment no longer belonged to him. The superior officer stopped a few feet away, his sharp gaze scanning the scene, assessing everything in a matter of seconds. His eyes lingered on Elijah, on the saliva glistening against his dark skin, then shifted to Hayes, who had suddenly stopped smiling. Name, the officer said, his voice clipped, efficient. Hayes blinked. What? Your name, the officer repeated. Hayes swallowed. Martin Hayes. The officer pulled a small notepad from his coat, scribbled something down. You have publicly assaulted a member of the Royal Guard. This is an offense under Section 5 of the Public Order Act. Hayes's face turned pale. What? Assault? No, He let out a nervous chuckle. Look, it was just a joke, okay? A bit of fun. He's fine, see? The officer didn't blink. You will come with us. The color drained completely from Hayes's face. His eyes darted to the crowd, searching for support, but there was none. No laughter, no sympathy, just the cold, unyielding realization that he had lost control of the narrative. Wait, no, hold on, he stammered, taking a step back. You can't. He didn't even do anything. He didn't fight back. How is this? He didn't need to. The officer cut him off. You did enough to condemn yourself. Elijah had still not wiped the spit from his face. He had not spoken another word. He did not need to. The discipline of the Royal Guard was not just about standing still. It was about commanding respect, without force. It was about knowing that power didn't always need to be displayed. It simply needed to be recognized. And now, Hayes recognized it. The officer nodded to his men. Within seconds, Hayes was being led away. His protests grew weaker, his bravado collapsing under the weight of what he had done. Come on! It was just a joke. Someone say something. But no one did. The tourists, who had once been mere spectators, were now witnesses. And the story they would carry home was not of a man humiliating a royal guard. It was of a fool who mistook silence for weakness. A woman near the front of the crowd exhaled slowly. Damn, she muttered, shaking her head. I bet he regrets that now. Elijah finally moved, but not to retaliate. With the same careful precision he applied to every part of his duty, He reached into his pocket, pulled out a white handkerchief, and wiped his face clean. Then, he stepped back into position, unshaken, unmoved. And as if the world itself understood that balance had been restored, the march resumed. The weight of the moment pressed down on the street like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Martin Hayes, now gripped by two uniformed officers, had lost the smug confidence he carried just moments ago. His face, once twisted in arrogance, now bore the unmistakable look of a man who had realized his mistake far too late. The tourists, once murmuring with amusement, had gone silent. The atmosphere had shifted from casual curiosity to something much heavier, something that demanded respect. Elijah Carter remained motionless, a statue of unwavering discipline. He had not retaliated. He had not spoken another word. Yet somehow, he had already won. The superior officer, his dark blue uniform adorned with medals, stepped forward. His eyes, sharp as steel, bore into Hayes like a blade, slicing through pretense. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" His voice was calm, but it carried an authority that left no room for argument. Hayes swallowed hard. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he had nothing to say. "Assaulting a royal guard is not merely an insult," the officer continued. "It is an act of disgrace upon the institution of the monarchy, upon the traditions of this nation, upon every soldier who has stood in this very place for centuries before him." The words hit like a hammer. This was bigger than Hayes, bigger than his childish need for dominance. He had disrespected more than just a man. He had disrespected history. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some had known this was serious, but not this serious. I didn't know," Hayes stammered, his bravado crumbling. "It was just a joke." The officer's expression didn't change. Ignorance does not absolve guilt. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, the officer turned, not to Hayes, but to Elijah. "Corporal Carter," he said, his tone shifting, laced with something unspoken. "Do you wish to proceed with official charges?" The crowd gasped. Hayes's head snapped up. Wait, what? He gets to decide?" For the first time since the incident began, Elijah moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward Hayes. His deep brown eyes, once stoic and unreadable, now held something else. Not anger, not vengeance, something far worse. Recognition. The look of a man who saw right through the pathetic, squirming creature before him. Who knew that no punishment, no law, no fine would ever be worse than the humiliation Hayes had just inflicted upon himself. Elijah took a single breath. The tension was unbearable. And then, no. The word was simple, but it shattered the air like a gunshot. "No," Hayes croaked, barely believing his own luck. "You mean, I can go?" Elijah didn't respond. He had already turned away, as if Hayes was no longer even worth his attention. The officers exchanged glances. The superior nodded. "Release him." The hands on Hayes's arms loosened. He stumbled forward, his feet unsteady, his face red with the realization that he had been given mercy. And somehow, that was worse than punishment. Because now, he would walk away, but he would never escape the shame. He had spat on a royal guard in front of a crowd of witnesses. He had tried to humiliate a man and ended up humiliating himself. Elijah stepped back into his original position, unbothered, unshaken, unmoved. And with that, the royal guards resumed their march. Martin Hayes stood frozen in place, his limbs stiff, his face burning with humiliation. The officers had let him go, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a sentence, one that would haunt him long after he walked away. The crowd didn't cheer. There was no applause, no words of sympathy, only the deafening silence of 100 people who had just witnessed his downfall. Elijah Carter had never raised his voice. He had never fought back. And yet, he had won. The Royal Guards resumed their march, boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. The rhythmic sound echoed through the street, a reminder that discipline and dignity would always rise above arrogance and hate. Hayes swallowed, his throat dry. He turned to his friend, but there was no comfort in the man's eyes, only quiet disappointment. "Let's just go," his friend muttered. But Hayes didn't move. His feet felt glued to the ground. It wasn't supposed to end like this. He had expected laughter, maybe even approval from a few like-minded fools in the crowd. But now, he was just the man who had spit on a royal guard and been reduced to nothing. The older gentleman who had spoken earlier crossed his arms, watching him with an almost amused expression. "That silence," he said. "That's the sound of respect leaving the room." A woman nearby shook her head, muttering under her breath. Unbelievable. He thought he could tear down a man like that, and look where it got him. Hayes clenched his fists, but there was nothing left to fight. No one left to impress. Just the weight of his own actions crushing down on him. He turned sharply, pushing through the crowd, his head low. The people parted for him, but not out of respect, out of disgust. And as he disappeared down the street, Elijah Carter stood tall, his uniform spotless, his dignity intact. Some battles don't need to be fought with fists. Some are won with silence. The city moved on, but those who had witnessed what happened would never forget it. Respect cannot be demanded. It is earned. And dignity? It is not something that can be taken away by words, by insults, or even by the most shameful of actions. Elijah Carter had not needed to fight back. He had not needed to raise his voice. In the end, the one who had tried to strip him of his honor had been the one to walk away in disgrace. A young boy standing with his father turned to look up at him. His voice was quiet, but filled with awe. "Dad, did you see that? He didn't even have to do anything." His father nodded, his eyes never leaving Elijah. "That's real strength, son." And with that, the boy smiled, gripping his father's hand a little tighter. As the royal guards continued their march, the sun cast its golden light over them, making their uniforms gleam. The world kept moving, but the lesson remained. True power lies not in the loudest voice, but in the one that doesn't need to speak to command respect. What do you think? Would you have been able to stand as firm as Elijah did? Or do you think Hayes got off too easy? Let's talk in the comments. And if you want more powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the quietest moments speak the loudest.